Well, hello again, Upminster Camera Club. This is Colin Strong here again to judge the advanced section of your annual PDI competition. As before, I have run through the images in advance, so I'm ready now to go straight into commenting on them and scoring them. So I'm going to bring up the first picture on my screen here, and hopefully you'll see the same. And this first one is called Cormorant. It's a rather splendid bird. I like the way its wings are outstretched. They sit like this, don't they, for some considerable time sometimes to dry out their wings. And it's a classic pose. There's plenty of light on the bird, plenty of light on the face there. You can see the eye very clearly. It seems sharp. There is some considerable noise, or appears to be on my screen here, particularly in the breast of the bird, but I think I can also see it in the water behind. So I don't know whether you've had to wind up your camera sensitivity, your ISO, rather high, or whether there wasn't as much light on the bird as it appears and you had to lighten it in post-processing. So that's a bit of a shame. It does rob it a little bit of the technical quality which I would look for in a natural history photograph. I can see from the reflections at the top of the screen that this is somewhere seemingly built up. Now, I have seen these birds in London's Docklands posed like this, so maybe it's somewhere like that that you took this photograph. But so it's a fairly classic pose. The bird just perched there on a bit of bamboo by the looks of it, stretching its wings to dry them in the sun. So yeah, I mean, a perfectly acceptable, perfectly reasonable shot. Nothing particularly exceptional, but I certainly find it very pleasant. And so I'm going to start off for this one, giving this one a 15. I perhaps should have mentioned before I started, of course, that I expect this advanced class to be from more skilled photographers, so I may be a little bit harsher than I was on the other two classes. So yes, a 15 for that one. So we move on now to one called Diamond Beach. Now the diamonds, of course, refer to those little blocks of ice on the beach there. This looks to me Icelandic. Wonderful beaches where you get the icebergs breaking off from the ice there and floating out to sea, and then being brought up and landed back on the volcanic beach. So the dark rocks very much suggest Iceland, and the way the blocks of ice there are sitting on the beach very much reminds me of that place. And you've caught this wonderful splash of water as it comes in. I hope you didn't get your camera wet in the process, because you do appear to be quite close to that. But it's a lovely piece of timing, and the light glints on the ice, making it very attractive. Quite a decent sky, not particularly heavy sky, but plenty of cloud and texture in it to provide interest. And the splash of water is against the darker part of the sky, and that works very well, of course. It does highlight the water very well. It stands out clearly against the background, and you can also see the waves coming in either side of that big splash as well. No, I think that's a very pleasant photograph. Well timed, well caught, well exposed. Not always easy when you've got bright water like this, but you've managed to retain the detail there in the shadows of the rocks as well. So no, that's good, and that one deserves a 17. Let's move on then to Early Light at Worthing Pier. Rather gorgeous time of day to photograph it, and a rather fine shot of it. Now, I don't know whether this is from a plane, a helicopter, or whether it's a drone shot, but either way, it's a rather fine view, and it makes a good shape within the picture frame. It's like a kind of, well, a right angle shape, an L sort of backwards, if you like. The shoreline going diagonally across the picture, and then the pier itself sticking out and coming down towards the bottom left. And I find that a very pleasant composition. Yes, there is a lot of empty sea bottom left, but that's not a serious problem. You might have liked it had there been something there to break up the interest, but or sorry, to break up that fairly plain sea. But it's not a serious loss. I think it's a at this time of morning you probably wouldn't expect very much out in the sea there. But there's gorgeous light on the pier itself and on the buildings behind. I can see the texture, the ripples in the sea around the end of the pier there. That's come across very well. And a very pleasant morning sky as well. And I do like the way that coast sort of leads me off into the distance and to a point there and then out into the open sea, I assume. No, it's rather a fine photograph. It looks really good, really lovely lighting. Well done for getting up early and getting that view of it. That's going to be a 17 as well. Okay, this one is called, I think, Eichdam, is it? Or Elchdam and Reservoir. Yes, I mean it's a fairly impressive dam, isn't it? I don't recognise the name. I don't know where this is, but it looks like a fairly probably a fairly hot country. Look by judging by the surrounding countryside, a lot of bare rock and white rock. And it looks quite a dry place. So this reservoir, I'm sure, is extremely valuable as a source of drinking water and irrigation. And yeah, it shows it off pretty well, doesn't it? You can see the full curve of the dam there, the water rushing over on the left-hand side. And it just gives you an impression of the kind of area in which the dam has been constructed. So, as a piece of information, as a piece of documentary photography, I think it's fine. As a piece of, should we say, artistic or creative photography, it's not so exciting. It's a fairly straightforward picture. The lighting is fairly even. It's not a particularly exciting lighting. The rocks themselves, sort of left and right of the dam, are quite pale in colour. I'd almost like the rocks either side and that building on the right hand side to be toned down a little so that it frames the dam and my eye is directed in towards the dam. Then of course you have the reservoir behind the dam, again quite a large part of the picture, but fairly plain, not a lot going on there, so no special interest. So really I'd say this was a photograph which was a great record of the construction and of the area, but not especially interesting or imaginative or creative. And I do look for something of the photographer's input in this class to get better marks. And in this case it may have been nothing more than different lighting. The lighting, as I say, is rather flat, rather uninteresting, and doesn't give a great deal of modelling to the scene. So maybe it's just the time of day it was taken. Nevertheless, it's a decent enough record. So today that one gets a 14. Now we move on to this one, Great Grey Owl Plunging into Snow After Vole. Well, there's a lot of detail there. When I first saw it, it looked to me like the owl was sort of struggling to stay above water level. It looked like water around, but I appreciate now that it is just it's banks of snow and the owl is sort of half buried in it. Quite an extraordinary sight and a remarkable capture, I have to say. The snow is quite dark in colour. Now snow can appear all kinds of colours. It does depend on the light surrounding it, or indeed on the landscape around it, because it reflects the colours around it. But it does look rather dark. It doesn't immediately look like snow, and I find that a little disappointing. I appreciate that the owl is pretty well exposed, so had you lightened the snow by giving more exposure, maybe the owl would have been overexposed and you'd have lost detail. So if that's how it came out of the camera, well, fair enough, I understand. But I don't know whether in post-processing you could have made the snow look more snow-like rather than water-like. But what a fantastic moment to capture. Incredible piece of photography there. Beautifully sharp, lots of detail. Okay, you've gone in close, so you could probably have, well, I could have accepted a bit more space around the owl just to give me a better feel for the surroundings, and maybe even capture the end of that shadow going off to the right, just as a thought. But nevertheless, as I say, a great moment to capture, very well timed. So I have to give that one an 18. Right, on to Tiffin Delhi. This portrait of a guy sitting having his lunch by the looks of it. It's rather interesting lighting here, and it gives this kind of a soft silky effect on his garments, which I find really quite novel, quite interesting. Where's the light coming from? It's somewhere over on the left, isn't it? But high up. If you look at the sort of streaks of light on the wall behind, it's quite odd, the effect it's having on the clothing. It's almost a soft focus effect. It's quite pleasant, really, in its own way. Yes, you've caught him in the middle of his meal. He's concentrating on his food. He may not even be aware that you've taken the photograph. Again, it's a nice enough portrait. I've got some hint of the surroundings. This bench or whatever it is he's sitting on, this concrete wall behind. I'm not quite sure what that is at the bottom left. It's hiding his foot. Indeed, the other foot's dropped off the bottom of the frame as well. That's a slight shame. Oh no, I beg your pardon. It is there, isn't it? I've just I was looking at the wrong. My screen had a bar across the bottom, which was hiding it. That's better. Yes, so it's a perfectly decent photograph. It's well exposed. It's despite this quite contrasty lighting, you manage to capture the detail throughout. As I say, that thing in front of his foot does bother me a little. Maybe if you had moved round to the side a little bit, we could have seen the whole of his foot. I'm not sure. It's a difficult one. It's a perfectly decent portrait, but shall we say I have seen better ones in this style. I think tonight I'll give that one a 16. Now then, there are several sets of 3 pictures in the competition tonight, so I'm assuming you had a set subject competition at some stage for triptychs. This certainly is the first one we see in this class, and I think this is really rather clever, rather imaginative. 3 pictures presented as if on the faces of a cube, although clearly they are separate. There's no join, if you like. You've kept them as separate faces, and I think that's fine. You've even provided a drop shadow behind them, which I think is rather interesting, and you've put them against this graded green background, from almost pure white at the top down to quite a rich green at the bottom, and of course that green echoes the foliage behind the daffodils. So 3 different daffodils or similar flowers, 3 different poses, if you like, but all the pictures themselves look very good, very satisfactory. They show the flowers very well, but of course the real thing about this is the imaginative way in which you've presented it. So if this was a triptych competition, I think you've done really rather well here. This is quite imaginative and I think rather successful. I shall give that one 18. Now we move on to the picture called Black and White. I can see what caught your eye here. It is those contrasts, isn't it? The lady on the left with the black stockings, the black skirt, the black handbag, the black hat, and then the white cardigan or whatever it is she's wearing on the top. And then the guy next to her, all in black apart from the white hat, with the black band around it. So yeah, it's an interesting thing you've spotted here. Okay, they've got their backs to the camera, but I think that works fine because it is the colours, the contrasts of the black and white which you're emphasising, and that's probably more pronounced when you see them from the back than from the front. The location isn't that exciting. The background is a little uninteresting, which is rather a shame. But what really I notice about this picture is the bright borders around the the two people. Look particularly at the man's trousers. On both sides, you've got this very strong highlight down his legs. Now, I'm assuming that you haven't cut these figures out and pasted them onto a different background, because I think you might have chosen a rather more interesting background if you'd done that. And the shadows look natural. So, no, I think these people were really there. So the cause of those bright highlights is most likely to be over sharpening, and it is very severe. That's too noticeable. I'm afraid in this class I expect you to be a little bit more careful about that. It almost makes them look like cutouts, and that's rather sad. And as I say, the background isn't particularly exciting. I love the fact you've captured these two people in this black and white contrasting clothes, but technically there are a few problems here. So in this competition, in this class, that will be a 13. Right, moving on to St Catherine's Dock. Taken in probably the evening, could have been early morning for all I know if you're an early bird, but certainly taken when there's light in the sky, but all the lights are on in the buildings, and it's rather impressive. I think you've captured this at a great time of day, and you've pictured it very well. It's an attractive dock, particularly at this time of the day. And oh yes, there are lots of boats there and they kind of overlap with each other, but in this lighting that doesn't really matter too much, because the main subject here is actually not the boats themselves. I think it's the buildings surrounding them, and you've captured those very well. Lovely, lovely detail on that building on the left. Look, you can see the brickwork, the way it's been lit by the artificial light. You can see the textures of the bricks, and of course the lights inside the windows as well. Then in the middle is that wonderfully modern glass building, which looks absolutely superb when it's lit up like that. You can see all the detail of the window frames and so on, and I'm sure if I looked closely enough I'd be able to see what was going on inside those windows. It looks like some sort of office block, doesn't it? And gorgeous, gorgeous reflections on the water. Now I would perhaps have suggested tilting the camera up a bit. Now, I know you don't want to cut out all those lovely reflections, but there's lots of space at the bottom there you could have lost, and I would like to have seen more of that building on the left. I think if the roof of that building on the left had tended to go towards the top left corner of the picture, that would have been a more effective composition. It would have led us into the picture more effectively, and the whole picture seems to me to be too high in the frame. So, but otherwise, as I say, it's you've chosen a good time to take the photograph, and I think you have got the exposure spot on. So I'm going to give that one, I think I'm going to give it a 17. Okay, so the next one is The Buck Stops Here. Yeah, clever title, clever title. They are facing each other up, aren't they? It looks like they're about to have a fight. So, you spotted the opportunity, you've got them lined up against each other, they're sharp, they're well exposed, you've cropped the scene just to isolate them, so no other information, just these two getting ready to fight, and I think that's fine. There's another one coming up, which I know actually shows these creatures or something very similar fighting. I don't know whether they're the same animals, I'm not sure. But I must admit, this is a little static. I think that's the real problem I have with it. I mean, I love what you spotted, and it's a great opportunity, well done for photographing it. Anyone would, but it is a fraction static, I think, as a picture. So well exposed, well composed, but that's a 15. Moving on, we have the wild bearded vulture. What an eye. Beautifully captured. That eye is pin sharp, and I think he's looking at us. It appears to be anyway. Plenty of detail in the head there, and good lighting which really reveals the feathers very well. Yes, we're seeing the back of the bird, but of course the way it's turned its head to the right means we've got all that detail in the eye, and we can see the shape of the beak very well, and even what appears to be a little beard underneath. I never realised they had that little tuft of feathers or hairs or whatever it is underneath their beak. Rather splendid, isn't it? So I think that's well captured. The background, of course, looks natural enough but unobtrusive. It's a suitable colour to match the bird, or to match the likely places where you'd find this bird, but equally it doesn't, the bird still stands out clearly against that background, which is what you want. So I think that's a good capture, an attractive shot, informative. Yeah, that one's going to be a 17. Right, yes, this is the other photograph I was referring to. Black-faced impala fighting. Now here you've got action. You've got the two creatures engaging with each other. You've got dust being kicked up, you're telling a story here. It's not just a picture of the animals. They're not just facing up to each other. They're actually engaged. They're fighting. They're doing something, and you've got this sense of danger almost. These animals can fight quite fiercely, can't they? And I think it's well placed. You've got quite a relatively narrow depth of field. I mean, the chances are you were quite some distance from these creatures using a long lens, hence the fairly narrow depth of field. But the animals are perfectly sharp, and the background is that little soft, slightly diffused focus, which is great because it makes the animals stand out very clearly, and their brown fur stands out well against that relatively bright background. I suppose if you wanted to apply some artistic improvements, you might have graded down the brightness a little at the top of the frame, like an ND grad effectively, but probably applied afterwards on the computer. That might have just held the picture in at the top, but I still think it's a rather fine capture. I rather like that one, and I'm going to give that one 17. Now we move on to the eye of the elephant. It's taken me a few looks at this one to decide what I think about it. It's not a piece of natural history photography, it's a piece of artistic interpretation. I doubt very much that the animal was taken just behind these leaves that you can see. It seems unlikely to me. I'm pretty sure this is a combination of two photographs, the elephant and then these leaves. But I think your idea here has been rather good. It's quite imaginative. The treatment of the elephant itself, the tonal adjustments on it, it is an interpretation. It's not an accurate record of the animal itself. I get the impression that the tones on the top of the trunk there, sort of the wrinkled skin on the top there, they look a little bit blocked, not continuous tones. I think you've applied some, I have no idea what effect you've applied, a filter or tonal adjustments there, which kind of give this sort of blocks of colour rather than continuous tones throughout. That's the impression it gives me. And of course you've also applied what appears to be a dark vignette all around the outside. So this is very much an artistic interpretation, artistic presentation, which features an elephant, and you've presented it in this interesting way, framing it with these leaves around the outside. I was very uncertain when I first saw it, but the more I look at it, the more I like the idea. If I accept that it's not a straight natural history photograph, it is an artistic interpretation, your own ideas presented imaginatively and constructively, and I think in the end, despite my initial concerns, I like this rather a lot as a picture. So I'm going to give that one 19. Okay, another triptych, this time the universe in a soap bubble. And that's rather fine. Yeah, I can see what you mean by universe. They do look like planets or something, galaxies. They're wonderful colours there. Probably, well, I'm guessing, photographed in polarized light or something like that to maximise the richness of these colours. So some very careful processing and thought gone into this. I like the way you've arranged the three pictures as well. So they fill the space properly. The three different sizes, three different shapes. That's worked well. Pure black background with the white key lines around each picture. Yeah, that works well. Good colours, interesting shapes, and yes, they certainly work together. So I hope this did well in that previous competition, which I'm assuming took place. I think that's rather good. There are other triptychs as well. There are some other excellent compositions in this class. So it's not going to get the top marks, but I think I'll give that one a 16. Now we move on to the paddler here, called Concentration, and yeah, he has got that look of concentration on his face, hasn't he? That's great. I think one of the things it's good to see in the pictures of kayakers and canoeists is if you can see the expression on their face, you get a real feel for the effort that they're putting in, and yes, the concentration, as you called it. I like the angle of the boat itself. I'm glad that you can see the top of the paddle and you see his hands on it very firmly. It's a good shape within the picture frame, and lovely fast shutter speed to capture that sparkling water and the waves around the boat itself. Great fun. We've seen quite a lot of pictures, of course, of this kind of subject in recent years, well, since the Olympics, I guess. But this is a great example. I think it's one of the better ones I've seen, and I'm certainly enjoying that. It's difficult when you're taking pictures of common subjects to be particularly original, but I do think you've done a good job here in composing it, and just having a look to see what I've given the other scores. Yeah. Okay, I think I'm going to give this one a 16. Right, moving on to the lilac-breasted roller. Superbly captured in flight. What a beautiful coloured bird. What a beautiful looking bird. And you've captured it absolutely perfectly sharp. Those full details in the eye, details in the feathers of the body, wings outstretched. Yes, there's a little bit of movement in the far wing, but hey, the bird's flying. Of course that wing's moving. And you've got it sort of left of centre, flying to the right, so fairly classic composition. My only disappointment is the blandness of the background. I'm assuming that's sky. It's got it's not a particularly blue sky, it's almost got a kind of magenta cast by the looks of it on my screen, which I hasten to add has been calibrated and profiled. So it should be an accurate representation of what you created. But it's a great shot of the bird itself. So it's a difficult one, isn't it? It's well captured, well timed, well lit. I just like something in the background to tell me, to give me a bit more information. That plain, absolutely plain background is not ideal to my mind. Nevertheless, for capturing it so well, that has to have a 17. Moving on to the end of the pier, and I do like the viewpoint you've chosen for this. I think you put the camera on the ground, pointed it along the length of the pier, and it kind of emphasises the converging lines created by the boards on the pier as they point towards that building at the end. You've arranged it symmetrically, so you've got these benches either side, perfectly placed either side of the building, and then you've got a few people at the end as well. The people, yeah, you're not going to get them to pose for you. You can't put them in exactly the right position. So there's a bit of a gaggle of people, which is maybe a bit of a shame. If you could have had maybe fewer people strategically positioned, but you know, I realise these things aren't possible. But I do like the lighting, I like the colouring, and I think you've processed this in such a way as to give quite a saturated colour to it, quite a rich feel, with a lovely sky across the top there as well. So no, I think it's a very attractive picture. It's just the positioning and grouping of the people which is less than ideal. Nevertheless, a 17 for that one. Next we move on to painting with light. Oh, it's the old burning steel wool, isn't it, whirled round in a corner. Yeah, I've never tried this, but I've seen plenty of examples of it, and I think I was going to try it once with another photographer, but the timing or the weather or whatever was against us, so we ended up not doing it, which is a shame. It's good fun, and apart from the sparks and the circle of light created by this, you've also got light on the building itself. Now, I don't know how you achieved that. Is it car headlights, or did you wave a torch over it? I'm not sure. It's you know, it's better than a plain black surrounding. It gives us some context, but there's a lot of the whole thing again is sort of to the right of the picture, so you've got a strip of absolute darkness down the left, which doesn't do anything. Did you need to include that? Could you have turned the camera more to the right, or could you have gone in closer? I don't know. Obviously I can't tell what the situation was when you were there, but it's an interesting contrast between the white light, or apparently white light, on the old stone structure and the brilliant orange of the burning wire wool. But I don't find it a particularly interesting composition in this case. I have seen better examples of burning wire wool being spun like this. So that will get a 14. Now on to Glacier View. My goodness, what a view. Isn't that absolutely splendid? Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And of course those figures there, the two figures prominently in sort of towards the bottom right on the intersection of the thirds, very powerful position, separation between them, and of course they give real scale to this. Oh, and I've just spotted some further figures over to the right of the frame as well, but they're more hidden. In fact, you know, you can ignore those, you don't need those. The two figures you've got towards in the intersection of the thirds, great, very strong, absolutely superb against the reflection of the glacier, and just wonderful shapes within the ice there, beautiful reflection, lovely, lovely scene, I have to say. That one's going to be an 18. So now we move on to Hummingbird Hawk Moth. I have no idea how you managed to capture this. You know, I'm assuming you have to be in a hide of some sort, because you'd never get close to the bird otherwise, or close to the moth, I should say. But that's quite extraordinary. I don't know whether you have to, whether this is kind of a natural shot, if you like, whether this creature really does come up to this flower to feed off the nectar, or whether you have to put some kind of a bait in there to attract it. I have no idea. I just think it's amazing that anyone can capture scenes like this, and you have my full admiration. Quite a splendid piece of photography. I can see the eye and the antenna, they're beautifully sharp. Yes, of course the wings are moving, they move so rapidly, but just look at that as it sups or drinks the nectar. What an extraordinary sight. I mean, very well captured. The creature itself again is against the darker part of the background. You've got some brighter leaves or whatever in the background there, but they're not distracting. But I like the way the wings are against a darker background. That's working so well. Yeah, very, very clever piece of photography that. Yeah, 19. And now we have the two mugs. Yeah, well, now I'm just trying to work out, are they mugs as in, another name for faces, or are they drinking mugs with faces on them? I don't think they are. It's difficult for me to see exactly what they are. They look more like, I think, well, look, the left one is being used as a plant pot, isn't it? It is a container. But trying to look at the background, I can't see what it's part of. They almost look like boots in the background, but I don't think they are. It's, yeah, curious. I mean, interesting ornaments for your garden, interesting things to grow your plants in. Quite fun. Does it work as a photograph? Well, you've certainly recorded something interesting. The growth on the left-hand side is kind of masking the eyes, particularly of the left-hand mug, which is a bit of a shame. I think if you tried to move the stems away from the eyes, that might have been better. I accept that they're going to partially cover the face. That's the nature of the trailing growth. But if you could have moved it slightly just to clear the eyes, I think that might have helped. Yeah, it's an interesting picture, interesting objects. It doesn't wow me as a competition entry though. So that one is going to be a 14. Okay, now we move on to light trails. So a busy dual carriageway. Oh, the sign in the middle there says it's the end of the motorway. Motorway is coming to an end. So no idea where this is. But again, you've aimed for symmetry here. You're over the central reservation. So you've got the two carriageways on either side. And then you've got the matching curves of the slip roads either side as well. Curving outwards, and of course then the long exposure gives the trail from the red lights, red tail lights on one side, and of the red headlamps, the white headlamps on the other side. And I think that's good. It's a little bit of lightness in the sky. It's not pitch black. That's great. I think I can see a couple of spots of light up in the sky towards the top left. Might be stars, or it could be just a plane coming through into sight. I'm not sure. So yeah, I think this is done quite well. I mean, interestingly, recording this as I am during the end of the first week of lockdown for the coronavirus, it's only today I've seen pictures of the M1 motorway absolutely deserted. So this wasn't taken in the last week. This was taken some while ago when the roads were normally busy. So yeah, it works well. So I think that one will be a 17. Okay, moving on to abstract. Another triptych. I rather like the effect of this one. Now, I might have to make some assumptions here. I'm going to assume that you haven't just taken a photograph of 3 paintings hanging on the wall and then stuck them together to make this composition. I'm thinking and hoping that you actually made the pictures in the first place, whether in camera or somewhere else, by some other technique, I don't know. But 3 abstract pictures, interesting colours, from the blues on the left moving through to the oranges on the right, so you've got sort of a complementary colours on either side of the picture. And then again, this rather pleasant background you've put them against a graded blue, which picks out the blues in the pictures as well. I just find this rather attractive, as well as being quite original and creative. Again, each individual picture has a slight drop shadow against the background, which makes it look good. Makes it look like they're physical objects sitting on top of this graded blue background, and I just find that really rather attractive, rather cleverly done, rather amusing. And I do hope you created those abstract pictures yourself, because I like this enough to give it a 20. Okay, I'm now moving on then to Sheffield Park. This is a fairly straightforward view of a rather delightful building and gardens, and I think the viewpoint is well chosen. The water in the foreground is an attractive base, and it also reflects the building and the trees, but particularly that sort of red tree in the middle there. That comes out beautifully in the water. I like the tall tree on the right providing a frame, so you've got a kind of backward L composition, which is good. It works well, and the building is very attractive, and there's plenty of information in the sky, a good cloudy sky. What's disappointing, I think, is the lighting. In any kind of landscape photography, you are absolutely dependent on the lighting to get the best possible effects. And here, although there is some blue sky visible, I don't think you've got any strong sunlight. Now, you don't necessarily want bright sunlight, but some hazy sunlight would give modelling to the building, give modelling to the trees. It would just lift the whole picture. So that's rather sad, and it's a thing you can only get over by going back to the same place again and taking the picture on another day. The actual viewpoint you've chosen is pleasant enough, as I say. It works well. It's nothing special. As a picture, it's a record of this rather delightful location. But as I say, it really does need better lighting to make it really stand out in this competition. So that's 15. Now we move on to The Edge of the Storm. Well, yeah, it's really quite an interesting picture, isn't it? That wonderful patch of sunlight in the middle there, and that fantastic rainbow in a rather dark, threatening sky. Very good. The rest of the land, really quite dark, unlit, or in heavy shadow, and maybe you've emphasised that in your processing as well. Just looking at it, I get the feeling that you may have darkened in the corners a little to emphasise the effect, to emphasise the fact that this is a stormy sky and a stormy view, and there clearly is water in the sky there to create that rainbow. But of course, without that patch of light in the middle, this picture would be nothing, even with the rainbow. It's a shame, perhaps, that there isn't a more interesting landscape in the foreground. Fortunately, that patch of light on a quite bright yellowish field is effective, but the rest of it is not particularly exciting, which is a shame. Nevertheless, it's you got out there, you captured it at the right moment, and thank you for doing that. That's a 16. And now we move on to a rather terrifying picture of a fish eagle about to pounce. And once again, I just admire people who can get photographs like this. This is beautifully sharp. It's a fantastic action picture. And just look at those claws. My goodness me, you wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of those, would you? Beautifully sharp eye, wings outstretched. Yeah, maybe a judge might complain about the wing going out top left, but that doesn't particularly worry me in this corner. If anything, I want more space to the bottom right to see where it's going into the water, what it's just about to pick up. But beautiful detail in the feathers, great detail in the eye, great detail in the beak, well exposed, well captured. I personally don't mind that wing going out the top left corner. I'm happy that you're showing us enough of the detail to really make this an interesting and successful picture. 18. Okay, so now we have the pose. Yeah, she's a bit of a poser, isn't she? My goodness me. Rather fine, rather splendid. I like the outfit. I like her pose. Yeah, I mean, this is created for effect, isn't it? You know, this is not how she normally walks around the streets of Upminster, I'm sure. It's a rather fantastic dress, and this amazing hair piece she's got on, quite extraordinary. And yes, the pose is affected. I think that's the best way of describing it. I think I said before that positioning hands on a model, it can be one of the most tricky things to make them look natural and not uncomfortable. But this works well because it is such a dramatic pose. I think that's really working rather well. Good shape within the picture. Now, that background, it looks like, you know, smoke or cloud or something. I'm not sure how that was produced. What I'm slightly disturbed by is that dark border around the right hand edge of her dress, or of the sleeve of the dress. That's where it's most noticeable. Now, it may be that once again that background was pasted in, or you've pasted her on top of a background, and you haven't quite mastered the difficult task of cutting her out properly because you've got this dark edge around her. The other possibility I thought of is that it might be a backdrop. You've got a painted screen or something, but she's close to it, and you've got a flash or direct light pointing almost directly at her, and that's just a slight hard shadow behind. I don't know, I'm not sure which it is, but it is a bit of a shame. It doesn't look good, that dark edge. It's not natural, and that's a bit of a shame, because you put a lot of effort here in getting her to pose, in getting good lighting on her face, getting her to model for you. So that, and I actually quite like the smoke background. I think that's quite effective for this particular shot. So it's whatever you did to achieve that, you've got this rather nasty black edge to the dress. So where should I put that one? I still like it as a shot, so I'll give it 17. Okay, now we're on to the monochrome picture, The Nets Out. Yeah, it's a fairly deserted place, a rotting boat, the rope coming into the foreground here, the nets spread out. It's looks like a Dungeness shot or something, someplace that's very similar to Dungeness in outlook. And an interesting sky behind. Yeah, it's the kind of shot I think we all like to take, but somehow it really lacks interest or excitement in it, and I don't know whether that's the treatment you've given or the composition or a bit of both. I think it's a bit of both. The boat itself is interesting enough. I'm not sure its position within the frame is perfect. I mean, I like the fact that it's at an angle, so the bow is top right and the stern is bottom left. You've got a bit of a diagonal there. That's good. And you've tried to make it interesting by giving a decent foreground, this curl of the rope leading past the nets and leading us up to the boat. So, you know, fair enough for that. And it's an interesting sky. I think maybe when you were converting it to monochrome, if you'd given it a bit more of perhaps a heavier treatment, perhaps, because it is actually fairly contrasty, but the overall tones are quite light. I just wonder whether a bit more punch, a bit more depth to the picture might have made it stronger. And to me, there's not enough of interest in the hull and the boat to make it really stand out as a strong picture, I'm afraid. But you know, it was worth trying, and maybe you've taken some others at the same time. See whether any of those work better. 15. Now we move on to the Moroccan, a rather fine, detailed portrait of this gentleman. I can well believe he's Moroccan. You know, the dress and the beard and the face, the skin. Yeah, they could well come from that part of the world, and it's a great portrait. I like it. I like the sharpness of the eyes. There's a good reflection in the eyes there. I like the look on his face. I'm not at all worried by the fact that he's not looking at the camera. It could be that he wasn't aware you were taking the photograph, but I think you appear to be close enough that he's likely to be posing for you. My only disappointment, if I'm honest with you, is that background. I mean, the colours obviously pick out the colours in his clothes, so yeah, it kind of supports the face, if you like, but if he's a Moroccan man, can you give me more hint about that? Perhaps a bit more of a natural surrounding, put him in his environment rather than that rather plain background. I find it perhaps too strong a plain background. If it were toned down, that might help, but I'd actually prefer a little bit more information about where he comes from. An environmental portrait showing a bit of the background there as well. But good face, you know, you've captured that well. Good detail, good lighting. Yeah, let's give that one 17. Okay, well I'm over halfway through, so I think at this point I'm going to take a break for a cup of coffee. You'll probably like one as well. So let's take the break there, and we'll come back later for to see what we're going to look at after the break. Thank you.